Good evening, everybody. How are you? This is Enrique Sanchez of Spanish United, and today we have a very special guest. Would you be kind enough to introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Yes, I'm Rabbi Jason Van Leeuwen. I am the rabbi and cantor of Temple B'nai Chaim in Sherman Oaks, California.
Welcome. Thank you for being on the show, Rabbi.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Likewise, yes. As we spoke over the phone, the topic of today has to do with conservative Judaism and the Hispanic community, and also how conservative Judaism, or Masorti Judaism, as is known outside of the United States, has played a part in developing the lives of Latin American Jews. So let's start with the first question. How has conservative Judaism and the Hispanic community have played a role in connecting Judaism with the diaspora in Latin America in the United States from your perspective?
Um, well, it's very interesting that you asked that question. First of all, I'm the graduate of New York's Jewish Theological Seminary, which was established by rabbis Pereira Mendez and Sabato Morais. They were Sephardic Jews who had been associated with the Reform movement. And in 1885, there was this banquet that celebrated the ordination of their first graduating class, and the banquet was, unbeknownst to many, not a kosher banquet. There was some things that were categorically treif in this particular banquet. And there were several professors, rabbis and other professors, who walked out, and they decided to start their own seminary in New York City in 1886. Of course, the original Jewish inhabitants of what is now the United States were all Sephardic Jews, escaping from the clutches of the Spanish Inquisition. And they came to these shores in, I believe, 1654 and established a synagogue in New York City, which is still in existence today. So the origin of the conservative movement, at least the seminary that spawned the conservative movement, were a pair of Latino rabbis.
Wow. Yeah, because when people think of Judaism, particularly conservative Judaism, a lot of people consider it to be more Germanic, because, as you know, when the conservative movement originally had their schism from the Reform, it started primarily from the German Jews that were in Germany at the time in the 19th century.
Yes, that is absolutely correct. Until the 1840s, the vast majority of the United States' tiny Jewish community were Sephardic in origin. And in the 1840s, we had a fairly large influx of Jews from Germany. And from 1880 to 1920, by 1880, there were about 250,000 Jews. The vast majority of them were of German origin. And then from 1880 to 1920, we had a massive influx of Jews. About 30 million people immigrated to this country in that 40-year period. 3 million of those were Jews. So very quickly, between the 1830s and the 1920s, what was originally a majority Sephardic Jewish community in the United States became a vast majority Ashkenazic community. And for your viewers, Ashkenazic Jews are Jews that whose origin is in Northern and Eastern Europe, and Sephardic Jews are Jews that were concentrated in Spain and were subject to the Inquisition, which started in 1391, and the Spanish expulsion in 1492. I myself am 1/8 Sephardic. My mother is a Jew by choice. Her family's been here since the Mayflower, and my father's four grandparents, one of them was Sephardic. My last name is Van Leeuwen, which is Dutch, and Holland was roughly equally divided between Jews of Sephardic and Ashkenazic origin.
Correct. And also another thing I want to bring out is that a lot of people don't realize is that prior And during the Holocaust, there were very few countries that were taking in refugees, and the few countries that were taking them in were from Latin America, primarily Cuba and Dominican Republic.
That is absolutely correct. It's funny that you mentioned that because my grandfather was a Jewish activist. He started what's known as the Jewish Colonization Society with the effort to try to find countries that would take in Jews. And he managed to get a small colony in Suriname, which took in a couple hundred Jewish refugees from Nazi-controlled lands. Mm-hmm. And that's something that can be researched. And my father's name was Henry van Leeuwen, and he was quite a hero.
Yes, yes. Because one of the things that I'm doing with my organization, Hispanic United, is to bring awareness of the plight of Hispanic people in the United States. And I feel that in many ways and many parallels that many Hispanics are facing a form of persecution because of immigration. And I feel the Jewish community could play a part in defending those rights. And one of the things that I'm doing is trying to bring both communities together, because I feel that Hispanics, because of many issues, are going through a crisis right now of Hispanophobia, which many people may not be aware about. And I feel that the Jewish community can play a big part in recognizing the plight of Hispanic people, especially now in the 21st century.
There's no question about that. In fact, I think Jews are at the forefront in the effort to welcome immigrants, which a large number of the immigrants over the last 30 years have been from Latin American countries. The Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, which began as an organization to resettle Jewish refugees, mostly from Eastern Europe, is now mostly advocating for non-Jewish refugees and others who are fleeing persecution and crime and poverty. And in fact, the whole reason why the mass shooting happened at Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh was because of a white supremacist who perceived that Jews were too pro-immigrant. Mm-hmm. And he had a particular enmity towards the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, went up and shot 12 Jews dead. And because of our perceived, I would say correctly perceived, image as being a community that it believes in welcoming immigrants, which we always have. The majority of the Jewish population today need only go back a couple of generations to learn that and they know their grandparents. They certainly know their grandparents' trials and tribulations in trying to get here. My own father is an immigrant from Holland. He came here at the age of 7 to escape Nazi Germany. His father, and this is obviously a very personal thing, his father, my grandfather, Henry van Leeuwen, who I spoke of before, his father could not get on a boat. He couldn't get a visa. The American immigration policies had been severely restrictive as of 1924. And because of that, he had a sponsor here in the United States. But unfortunately, that sponsor's last name was Trotsky, which didn't sit well mm-hmm. with, I assume, the State Department. He was not allowed in. And indeed, he is a Holocaust survivor. He spent several years in Bergen-Belsen. He nearly died. He managed to get rescued by the Red Cross and nearly died of typhus. He had to recover from typhus before coming to the United States, which he finally did. My father and his siblings and their mother did not know that their father was alive or dead for 6 years. And my father found out that his father survived on the day of his bar mitzvah in 1940.
Oh, wow. That's amazing, really amazing. Yeah. And also to the second question, how would you describe conservative Judaism or Masorti Judaism outside of America in Latin America in terms of relations with the Hispanic community, both Hispanic Jews and non-Hispanic Jews?
First of all, the conservative movement has 4 different seminaries around the world. We have one in Los Angeles, the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies.
Mm.
We have the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York. We have the Beit Midrash in Jerusalem, but we also have the Seminario Latinoamericano in Buenos Aires. And in Buenos Aires, the conservative movement produces its own conservative rabbis, which fan across Latin America, and some obviously make it to the United States as well. I should add that there are 500,000 Latinos who identify as Jews. 300,000 of them are in Latin American countries, Central and South America. Another 200,000 of them are in the United States, and one of them is my wife.
Oh, wow. Is she from Argent? Is she an Argentine Jew?
She is a Mexican-American Jew by choice.
Oh, okay. So she's a convert.
A geira, as they would say, yes.
Okay. Nice. Awesome. Congratulations. Yeah, because one thing that I've seen, which I've had many intakes with many Hispanic Jews, is that because as you know, during, as time goes, the demographic shifts, that the Jews of today in America primarily are Ashkenazi backgrounds. So from what I've spoken to, many Jews feel that it's very hard to integrate, especially when you don't have Spanish-speaking synagogues. Because the thing about Sephardi Jews, especially here in America, is that most of them are not from Latin America. Most of them come from the Middle East. Some of them come from Iran. And some of them are their own subsets, like the Mizrahim, which are like their whole different Miknahim of Jews. So it's like, how can the conservative movement in particular help interrogate Jews of Latin American origin that want to be part of a community that's practicing, but they tend to be rejected by the Orthodox community?
Well, one thing before I answer that question, I do want to clarify that the vast majority of Latino Jews are themselves Ashkenazic. They're not Sephardic. They are just like the wave of immigration to the United States. There was a similar wave of immigration late 19th and early to mid 20th century of Ashkenazic Jews of German and Eastern European origin who were not able to get into the United States. They ended up going to places like Argentina, which has the Latin America's largest Jewish population of roughly, I would say roughly 200,000, 300,000 Jews in Latin America are in Argentina, and the vast majority of them are of Ashkenazic origin. What we are finding interesting is that this phenomenon of Latinos finding out that they have Jewish origin. There was a recent DNA study of Latinos. There are roughly 600 million Latinos in the world, I believe.
Yes.
Well, and it was found that 25% of them had at least 5% Sephardic Jewish DNA.
Mm-hmm.
That's 150 million people.
That's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people, and that means a lot of these descendants of descendants of crypto Jews who basically lost their practices. There are a few children of crypto Jews who are wondering, well, why did Abuelita light candles on Friday night in the basement?
Mm-hmm.
Why doesn't she eat pork? Oh, I just don't eat it. And there are all those little things. Sometimes there's this, I think there's this flatbread that was very popular in Latin American communities that was believed to have derived from matzah that they would often eat for Easter, but which was actually intended for Passover.
Right.
And so people are finding out who they are, and this is not a new phenomenon. We have my colleague and friend, Rabbi Daniel Melman, who I recommend you check him out. I can give you his contact information.
Yeah,
he is the rabbi of Temple Ner Tamid of Downey. He himself is an Argentine Jew, and he has been working closely for several decades with Latinos who have discovered their Jewish origins, and they want to learn more about it. And he is probably at the forefront of the conservative movement's effort to find a home for people who want to learn more about who they are. Mm-hmm. And there are a few, but they're growing communities of descendants of crypto Jews who are finding their roots, are reaffirming their Jewish heritage. They're converting to Judaism. I believe we have a small community of such people in Tijuana, if memory serves well. The conservative movement, actually, this is a worldwide phenomenon. The conservative movement has reached out all over the world. Very famously known for going to Uganda and going with a group of people called the Abu Yudaya group that had engaged in many Jewish practices. They were isolated from the rest of the Jewish community. And it was the Masorti conservative movement that went down there and educated all of them, converted them. And indeed, one of them, Gershom Sizolu, is a rabbi, has gone back to Uganda, and indeed was elected to its parliament.
No kidding.
And his son went to Jewish day school with mine.
Nice,
Many years
nice.
ago. So, and I believe we have another Abba Yudaya coming to the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies here in Los Angeles. There's a rabbinic effort to raise money to cover his learning and living expenses.
Nice.
So this is a worldwide phenomenon. This is not just in Latin America, but I really would recommend you research Rabbi Marshall Meyer of blessed memory. Rabbi Marshall Meyer was the one who went down and started the seminario in Buenos Aires, and he was famous not only for that, but also for really very vocally opposing the military junta that ruled Argentina between 1976 and 1983. Mm-hmm. And there were a lot of dissidents and desaparecidos in Argentina. Among them were Jews such as Jacobo Timmerman. And Rabbi Meyer really spoke truth to power. And somehow they didn't deport him. They didn't kick him out. They didn't kill him. He was a little bit too vocal, a little bit too prominent to touch.
Right.
And, that seminario continues to function and thrive and produce rabbis that serve all over the entire the 300,000 Jews in Latin America, and we do have decent-sized communities of Jews, of Latino Jews, particularly in Los Angeles. There are quite a few Jews who came from Argentina, Jews who came from Mexico City, and many of them are in Los Angeles. But you are correct. There, we don't have a Spanish-speaking or largely Latino Jewish community, at least not a synagogue, although there are organizations that bring them together.
Right, of course. Yeah, because one of the things that I believe is that there needs to be Hispanic unity. At the same time, I believe there needs to be Jewish unity. As you know, even though Jews come from different backgrounds, may have different practices, as you know, according to Halacha, we are part of Am Israel. We are one people, and I feel that working with the Hispanic community and with the Jewish community together, I feel that any barriers can be erased. At the same time, it can bring people to understand that they have more in common than anything else, because a lot of Hispanics, regardless if they know it or not, do have Jewish ancestry. Like, for example, a lot of Spanish names like Perez, Sanchez, Martinez are actually of Jewish origin. Many people don't realize that.
That is correct, and quite a few prominent Latinos in history turn out to be Jewish. My favorite among them are both Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo, both Jews.
Yes, and at the same time, one of the things that I do with my organization is to also combat Hispanophobia within certain communities. Like, I know that within the Jewish community, especially among the more progressives, are more open, but I have a little bit concern about the far right end of Judaism, especially people like Michael Savage and all those people that kind of spew the same rhetoric as those that are part of the far right that are Gentiles. So I feel that as a whole, we need to work together to combat that, because remember, every person has gone through different tribulations, some worse than others. And one of the things that I'm doing with my organization is to educate many Jews that are not aware of many Hispanics that have taken in a lot of Jewish refugees. And then when a lot of Hispanics, come here as immigrants, and again, I'm just saying from isolated cases, they feel discriminated, especially by the same people who actually were taken in by their ancestors, decades ago.
Yes, there's no question about that. I think the one thing that we do have to recognize, of course, is the difference between ethnocentrism, racism, and colorism. Um, I think that they present themselves in different ways in different communities. The 90% of Jews in the United States are white, but that percentage is starting to dwindle. In my religious school, I would say 30 to 40% of my students are Jews of color at this point. So I think what we're seeing is that the kids today, the kids born since the post 9/11 community, we're seeing a much larger number of Jews who of diverse backgrounds, Asian American Jews, Latino American Jews, African American Jews. And because of that, I think there will continue to be greater sensitivity to the struggles of those who are not considered, quote unquote, white. I will say this. After you gave me a call yesterday, I was trying to think about my own experience of the Latino community, and I would like to share a couple of vignettes. I grew up in upstate New York, and we had a tiny Latino population. I can think of maybe one or two people I went to high school with that were Latino. We had a fairly large African American population, however. So my exposure to Latinos was through the PBS show Electric Company, and my favorite character is Carmela, played by Rita Moreno. And it was on that show that I learned Spanish. I learned how to pronounce Spanish, and then I went on Zoom. And of course, there was a character named Luis, and he was a great dancer. And this was my exposure. And I know that sounds trite, but when you have no exposure whatsoever to Latino Americans, except for these positive portrayals, that then you obviously are going to be forged. You're going to forge an identity that is positively predisposed to that community. Of course, when I grew up in upstate New York, there was a great deal of racism. And I moved to California when I went to college, and I was really amazed at how little racism against African Americans existed. But man, I cannot count the number of times when I would hear somebody make a denigrating remark about what they called Mexicans. And when they said Mexicans, basically it was anybody who was Latin American. Right. And they just assumed, well, they're Mexican. Oh, it was just some Mexican.
Right.
And the Jewish community experienced the Latino community over the last before about maybe 10 or 20 years ago. The Jewish community often interacted with the Latino community in the service industry, in fast food restaurants, or as gardeners, or as housekeepers. I go into a supermarket, and there's little books saying, basically a little English to Spanish dictionary called Tell a Maid, and just like, and I see all these things, but nowhere did I learn how to say please, por favor.
Exactly.
Please wasn't in the book. And I'm like, what's up with that? But I think that's changed to a large degree because, at least in Southern California, the Latino community has become the plurality of those who live in Los Angeles, and I believe they are the majority, perhaps the vast majority of public school students in Los Angeles. So things have changed a great deal. Latinos, at least as far as the Jewish community is concerned, are no longer perceived as someone who is there to provide some sort of servitude, but rather somebody who you might fall in love with, as I did. My niece, I just did a wedding of my niece last year, and her husband is from Guatemala, and we met the whole family, the whole Guatemalan family. And so we're finding more and more of this interconnectedness, familial interconnectedness between Jews and, well, pretty much everybody.
Exactly, and that's the whole point. I think it's very important that people, work together, and try to put aside their differences and try to work for the better good. Because again, as long as we're on this earth, we're all going through different things. We may have our, cultural, linguistic, and racial differences, but we all have the basic needs. We have to eat, we have to sleep, we have to work, we have to provide for our families. So I really think it's very important that we find ways to try to put aside stereotypes of people based on what they don't know, and try to work together for the better good. And that's what I'm doing with Spanish United, is reaching out to different organizations. I myself, being a Hispanic Puerto Rican Jew myself, trying to be a bridge between the Hispanic community at large and with the larger, wider Jewish community in the United States.
Well, you're doing God's work.
Toda Rabbi, I really appreciate it. So,
I'd be interested in, would
Sure.
you be willing to, pardon me for turning the tables,
Sure, go
would
ahead.
you be interested in sharing with me your own Jewish journey?
Yeah, sure. I was born to a Puerto Rican Jewish mother and a Spanish Guatemalan Jewish father, but I was not brought up religious. I became a Baal Teshuva in 2010 when I was 26. The first time I wore tefillin, I wore a kippah. And at that time, I was doing great, but since I didn't really feel accepted in the Orthodox community, I kind of went off the track. And I was actually first exposed to Conservative Judaism when I first moved to LA. There was a little conservative shul over on Wilshire called Temple Beth Zion.
Yes, I know it well.
And the rabbi, blessed memory, passed away, but I do have to say that that synagogue really helped me out a lot in many ways. They gave me my first humash,
Nice.
and something that I very cherished. And I'm just, I don't consider myself to be religious, but I do have a lot of respect for the conservative movement, because they're like an in between Orthodox and Reform, where it's not that strict, but it's not that liberal, and they try to keep a balance, and they're more welcoming towards people than, let's say, the Orthodox or the Reform, from my personal experience.
Yeah, that's been my experience as well, and that is the reason why I am where I am. I am a traditional Jew myself. I keep the Sabbath. I daven every morning. I keep kosher. Actually a kosher vegetarian, technically.
Same thing with me.
All right, good for you. And yeah, I mean, my mother's a Jew by choice. Technically, I'm a Jew by choice. I was 3 years old, and I'm married to a Jew by choice. My first wife was a daughter of a Jew by choice, and which means that over the last 50 years, there's been this amazing integration of Jews and non-Jews of all walks of life. And I did happen to notice that when I was teaching at the Ziegler School at the American Jewish University's Introduction to Judaism program many years ago, I was struck by the disproportionate number of Latinos in the program. It's funny. I used to talk about how 100 years ago the non-Jews used to want to burn us, and now they want to marry us. That obviously is progress.
It's a major progress, and indeed.
It is progress. It also presents a challenge, because we want to preserve our Jewish identities. We want to preserve our Jewish cultures. And I will say, I think that that some of the difficulties that some white Jews have with other Jews is not due to whether they're Jewish or not, because there's also a great deal of tension among the large number of Jews who have migrated here from Iran.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard disparaging remarks made about them. But my overall impression of the Jewish community outside the Orthodox movement, and to a great deal inside the Orthodox movement, is that they're very welcoming of people of all walks of life. It's pretty normal. I think about the people in my congregation, and they got people there who were born in the Congo, Russia, Italy. I mean, there's a total United Nations in my congregation, and it's normal now.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think there might be a little bit of colorism going on as well. I think there's sometimes a disdain on the part of white people, Jewish or not,
Mm-hmm.
of those who are of a darker complexion, Jewish or not.
Mhm.
I think that's something that internally we have to deal with. We have to come to terms with our biases towards people who don't look like us.
Mhm.
But my personal experience of the Latino community is, as a Jew, I feel very much welcomed. I remember once I was very much involved with Unite Here and Clergy and Laity United for Economic Justice, an organization I recommend highly in LA. And we were trying to help unionize the hotels on Century Boulevard. And one of them was the LAX Hilton, which I have boycotted and continue to call for boycott for the last, 17, 18 years now. And I remember the vast majority of the workers there, they're trying to unionize, are Latinos. And we went to a rally, and there were hundreds, maybe 1,000 people there. And it was around Rosh Hashanah, and I brought my shofar, my ram's horn. And I brought it up in the air and talked about oppression. I said, that's why I brought this. And I said a couple more words, and then I blew the shofar, a very long blast, a Tiyah Gedolah, and you could hear a pin drop.
Wow.
And I went out into the crowd, and people were crying. They were shaking my hand. They were thanking me. And one of them said, I thought those walls were going to come down, which I thought was really an important inflection point for me, because Latinos tend to be very religious,
Mhm.
Catholic, as well as evangelical and Protestant. They're steeped in the Bible. There's a strong sense of an extended family, which is something that is shared with the Jewish community. And when they see a Jew in a ram's horn, it's very resonant for many of them who were raised on the idea of the chosen people, the Israelites. I think there is a natural affinity between the Jewish community, white, African American, Latino, or Asian, and the Latino community of any religion as well. It's a natural affinity. I don't think we should focus so hard on fighting the Stephen Millers of the world, and we should focus more on deepening these bonds between us, because the dividing line is illusory. There really is no dividing line. As we know, there are 500,000 Latino Jews. That's a lot of people.
That is a lot of people.
And the number is growing. And we'll see over the next 30 years what will happen once these whatever portion of the 150 million Latinos who have a Sephardic Jewish DNA do to seek what that means and what they should do about it. I think that we need to be ready for a possibly massive influx of Latinos interested in Judaism over the next 2 or 3 decades.
I definitely am for it. I want to tell you, Rabbi, thank you so much for being on the show. It was very insightful. And as soon as I'm done, I will send you the link with the podcast. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Hope to see you come to Shul this Shabbos. Don't forget, I promised I'd give you a Siddur.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna try to make it. Toda Rabbi. I really appreciate it.
Okay, you're on our email list too, so we'll keep you in the loop about what's going on.
Definitely. Have yourself a good evening.
All right. God bless.
You too.
Live long and prosper.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.